Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Because of the pandemic, we have seen a great increase in virtual instruction and a decrease in after-school activities. Even in school districts that have adopted the hybrid model of education, after-school programs seem almost non-existent. This leaves us to wonder, how many children are on their own after the last school bell rings? How do working parents manage the afternoon hours? How large is the unmet demand for after-school programs nationwide and in each state? And are parents satisfied with their children's after-school programs? To help us understand and answer these and other questions, we welcome Jodi Grant, Executive Director of the Afterschool Alliance, and Heather Nesle, President of the New York Life Foundation. Welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Well, this is definitely a first on Instruction Discussion to have two guests at one time. So I think this is because it's a very important topic to discuss anyway. So again, I'm glad that both of you were able to carve out some time to be with us today. I know that recently the Afterschool Alliance has published a study called America After 3 p.m. 2020. Can either of you tell us a little bit about what prompted the study and what some of the results are?
Sure. So this is a study that the Afterschool Alliance does regularly, every 4 or 5 years. And the study surveyed about 30,000 people on their views of after school. And what we found was that demand for after school has only been increasing. For every child that is currently in a program, 3 times as many want to be in a program. And the things that are preventing them from doing that are often cost and transportation issues. But of the families and parents that do have children in programs currently, and I should say this, the majority of the survey was done pre-pandemic, although we did go back to ask some questions during the pandemic to get more information. But even before the pandemic, when families were currently enrolled in programs, their satisfaction levels were 94%. So parents are incredibly satisfied with the quality of the programming that they're receiving. And incredibly, 87% of the parents surveyed support increased public funding for after-school programs. So the after-school programs that are out there are good programs. They're helping families, and we need more of them. So
do we know if families and children in every state are able to access the after-school programs that they need?
So the answer. Oh, sorry, Heather. So the answer to that is no. What we have found is that across the nation, as Heather said, for every child that's in an after-school program, the parents of 3 more would like their kids to be in programs, but they're not available. In New York State, it's worse. It's the parents of 4 kids for everyone in a program want these programs because they know they make such a difference. So we need to be doing a lot more. Now, that said, our report covers all 50 states. So it does have the data from the kids that are in programs and parent satisfaction, which is through the roof. Also, I did want to say that so many of these programs have been jumping through hoops to serve kids during the pandemic. So for those that aren't allowed to operate in schools, if they were based in the school, they're either operating virtually and then delivering meals and lesson plans, or they're operating in libraries and parks and recs and museums and science centers, wherever they can, to try to reach kids. And for so many kids, if they're in a hybrid or a virtual situation, we have after-school programs that are trying to run all day long, both with virtual and then, wherever possible and where there's enough resources, creating in-person learning centers for kids to do their virtual learning with academic support and enrichment.
So I'm glad you mentioned that the study covers pretty much every state in the union. So how does New York specifically compare to the other states or nationally in this study?
So New York is interesting. New York is one of the states where there is a state funding stream, which is really terrific because one of the things we've seen in this study is particularly for low-income and lower-middle-class families, there's more and more barriers to after school, with cost and transportation being the two biggest ones. So the places where there's state funding and, of course, the federal funding, that is the only lifeline for low-income parents. That said, the demand in New York is higher than the national average. So even though New York is serving, quite a few kids based on some of these federal funding streams and the parents that can pay, for every child that's in after school, there are 4 more that are waiting. So that's 66% of children, about 1.6 million, who would be in after school programs if they were available to them.
Yeah, and I think while the unmet demand is very high in New York, parents that do have their children enrolled see, many key benefits from after school. So 82% say that after school gives them peace of mind. Another 82% say that after school is helping kids build life skills. And I think crucially, 78% noted that after school is helping their kids get excited about learning, which is so crucial to keeping kids engaged, not just in after school, but also in school.
Yeah, I would also say that, one of the things we found across the board in New York is that parents recognize the need for public investment so that we can reach more kids. And 88% of parents, doesn't matter if they're Democrat, Independent, or Republican, they support more investments in the after-school space.
Now, I don't know if this study goes this deeply or if the analysis of the study goes this deeply, but is there a way to see what those numbers look like, separating maybe New York City from Long Island or from the upper region of New York? Has it been broken down in that way?
So, no. The answer is right now we have it for each of the 50 states. We may be able to do some of the New York City numbers at a later date, but not the other regions. It's a question of our sample is 30,000 parents, so we need to have enough people from an area to do that oversample. Understandable.
So, I know that this study was primarily done or gathered this data primarily pre-pandemic, but have you, in your follow-ups, have you been able to see, has there been any type of impact on the virtual space? So since there is a lot more being done educationally, being taught virtually, how is that impacting the availability of after-school programs?
So, one of the things we found in our follow-up surveys is, first of all, for just like before, for parents that can afford it, they spend 5 times as much as low-income parents on enrichment for their kids. And for parents that can afford it, their kids are much more likely right now to be involved in in-person activities, both in after-school and in enrichment, with all of the public health and safety components engaged in it. And that unfortunately for lower income kids, they are much less likely to be, in person right now, which is, of real concern. But we are finding that, 90% of programs out there are operating, many of them virtually, more and more of them are finding ways to do things in person, but we can't reach as many kids because of all of the additional costs, and some of the kids are harder and harder to reach during the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think like so much else we've seen, not just with the pandemic, but broadly, there are really troubling inequities for Black and Latinx children who are disproportionately without after-school opportunities. That was true before the pandemic, and I'm sure it's been exacerbated because of the pandemic.
And one of the things we're really concerned about is, there's all of this attention on academic loss, which is very real and a big concern, but so many of our kids have been socially isolated, and many of them have been traumatized, with food insecurity, with, the pandemic raging. So it's really essential, and our field can play a big role in this, in making sure our kids feel safe, both mentally and physically, before we can even start tackling the academic loss. And particularly for those kids that have been isolated, making sure that we have caring adults that can work with them.
Yeah, that's a very good question that that's a very good point that you raise, in that we spoke a little bit earlier that I used to work in the school myself, and I was a school leader for a long time. And I know one of the things that I've noticed, especially with after school programs, is a lot of families who are working late hours, whether you're in a single family household or even in a dual income household, families are working various hours. And so they may not be able to be home during the quote unquote dinner hour to provide meals for their children. And so there are some after school programs that actually provide dinner for their children. So that aids in the overall development. So again, we're not just thinking about it from an academic standpoint, but also from a social, emotional standpoint, from a health standpoint as well, that the importance of all the after school programs that are out there. So what are some of the things that the After School Alliance is doing to help support after school programs and activities?
So the After School Alliance is always trying to support programs and activities. One of the things you just mentioned was we actively worked with Congress to approve funding so that kids could be served meals in after school, not just snacks. So that's exactly the kind of thing we've been working on. And when it comes to hunger, we've been working throughout the pandemic to get flexibility and waivers so that after school programs can provide meals to families and not just have them, pick it up meal by meal, but actually delivering meals to feed families when they are not in school. And throughout the pandemic, we've been trying to share best practices and guidance and even curriculum, both socially distanced curriculum and virtual curriculum, so that programs can, learn from one another and support each other, and most important, support the kids. And I just can't emphasize enough how blown away I am by the after-school programs in our country and what they've been doing, literally in some cases, like showing up at a kid's door to make sure they're okay because they haven't heard from them, and, trying to create as much normalcy as possible during this really challenging time.
Yeah, and I think beyond, food, these programs really provide a number of ways that benefit the health of young children. I mean, for a lot of programs, the physical activity is the most that a child's getting throughout the day. They're doing dance classes, they're doing basketball. They have a lot of physical sort of options in after school that they don't during the day. And then from a mental health standpoint, these are programs that are focused on social and emotional development, looking at the whole child, oftentimes dealing with trauma. And then, Jodi and I were just talking about some of the ways programs have been able to be flexible and pivot during the pandemic. A lot of them are doing more programming outside during even the cold winter months, in states where it gets cold, which offers other benefits to children, just being out in the fresh air, being able to socialize when oftentimes during the day they are not. So there's a lot, I think, of health benefits to these programs as well.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nesle Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guests today are Jodi Grant, Executive Director of the After School Alliance, and Heather Nesle, President of the New York Life Foundation. It's interesting that you mention about the social emotional aspect of and support that after school programs normally give. And I'm glad you raised that, because I was going to ask you, what are some of the examples or some of the things that you may have seen across the country that of programs supporting those initiatives? You mentioned about going door to door or visiting people to do wellness checks and things like that. But are there any other how have programs done their pivots to support their students?
So, programs are doing, so many things, and much of it can be captured. We have a lot of examples on our website at afterschoolalliance.org. But I would say, everything from organizing, like yoga classes and soccer drills to opportunities for chat rooms where students can talk about issues. We've had a bunch of opportunities for students to work with each other as they, support each other as they get through this pandemic and talk about their experiences. We've seen programs organize, town hall meetings where students are featured. We've seen literal productions that are done virtually. I mean, the creativity just can blow you away with what programs are figuring out. And not just, when you think virtual, it's not just give and receive where it's, on one end of the screen. There's very much, thought going into being interactive, and then also how kids might be able to be doing an activity being driven both by virtual, and then in many places, not every kid has access to virtual, so creating literal lesson plans and activities that kids can do if they don't have access to the technology or the internet or the space to do something on their own virtually.
I think mentorship is another big key component of a lot of these programs, and especially with a focus on near-peer mentors. So either, recent sort of high school or college graduates, or in some cases even, children maybe who are in high school mentoring middle school and elementary school children. And being able to give some of that one-on-one attention and just being there to listen and to understand some of the concerns and things that children are going through during this time is crucial and critical to letting them know that they are supported.
Yeah, and I would say, building on that too, because isolation is such a big concern, we've been hearing from programs, one of the, things that's happening is they're having more interaction with some of the parents too.
So, Heather, tell me, what is New York Life Foundation's role in supporting all of this, in all these endeavors of the After School Alliance?
Sure. So the New York Life Foundation has been focused in the after-school space with a particular emphasis on helping middle school students get to high school on time and on grade level since about 2013. And we have provided funding in excess of $58 million to that end. And really our investments, again, are focused on helping this critical transition period. We know that children who get to ninth grade on time and on grade level are 4 times more likely to graduate high school on time and then to move on to some kind of post-secondary success. And so we're really concerned with, children sort of being able to have that success, to have financial security later in life. And so that's where our focus has been. And we provide support for organizations like the Afterschool Alliance that are helping to provide wide-range capacity support for the sector, as well as to direct service providers who are actually doing the work on the ground with the children.
Thank you for that, and I'm glad that we do have organizations like yours who are able to provide that level of funding. Let me ask you, and either of you can answer this question: where are your programs mostly situated? Well, that may not be a fair question. Do you see that there are programs in urban areas equal to suburban areas, or where do most of your programming, or do you find most of the programming more robust?
So that's a wonderful question, and I would say at the After School Alliance, while we constantly focus on, high quality programs for everyone, we are really focused on access. And so looking to the kids whose parents want them to be in programs, but, are facing barriers like we found in this survey. And I would say those barriers exist everywhere. So it's as much a issue in rural America as it is in urban America. And in urban America, there's places where you may have more kids in programs, but you also have much more demand for programs. So, and that's one of the things that has really led to such strong bipartisan support for after school. So while we need more resources, you have members of Congress from every community that can go and see these programs and see what a difference they make for the kids, for the parents, and literally for the local economy.
Now, I know because of the pandemic that's been going on, we have seen that these educational pods spring up in many communities. Have you noticed anything kind of similar to that happening with after school programs where communities kind of band together to offer these spaces for activities for their students?
So the answer is yes, that after-school programs are trying to fill that gap. The reality is for parents that can afford it, they're creating pods, they're getting tutors, they're paying for their kids to go to sites where, it might be a karate club and they're getting to do karate and they're getting to, do their virtual learning. And we are seeing across the nation after-school programs trying to create these all-day hubs. It costs more than, if you're normally running a program for a couple of hours in the afternoon. Now we're going all day long with additional requirements for often we need new space because we can't use the schools. We need more staff because of the student-to-staff ratio. You need PPE. But it is happening. And you have some statewide efforts like Oklahoma and Vermont where we're creating these learning centers and hubs, citywide efforts like San Francisco. And there is an effort in Congress, bipartisan effort in the Senate, to provide some federal funding for these, what we're calling hubs or learning centers too. And I think it's really important because it's a reminder that as important as school is, kids are learning all the time, and you do not need to be, inside the school walls to be able to learn.
So let's investigate that one issue that you brought up just a moment ago is we know that a lot of schools, even schools that are in person or hybrid models and so forth, they're not able to stay open in the evening like they used to be because they have to go through their deep cleaning processes and so forth. So what other avenues are there to supply these places where people can go for after school programs? Where other, buildings have you looked into or have they looked into to offer their programming?
So we have on our website, we have a whole blueprint that we've put out with the kinds of places you can think about. And it is everything, clearly parks and recs, libraries, museums, science centers, historic sites, playground facilities, but even unused office space. And in the places where this is most successful, you have city leaders getting behind it and really trying to find that space where kids can learn. And I would say, there's also examples of a couple of places, and I'd love to see more of this, where if the school is closed virtually, they still are allowing the after-school programs to operate there, with the smaller set of the students that really cannot, for a variety of reasons, learn at home.
And I know you also mentioned about the political support that is this groundswell that's building to get some federal funding. Is will part of that funding be for transportation? Because we know that even if the schools aren't going to be available and there may be a Parks and Recs or a library or some other community center that is maybe about a mile or two away, families still need to get their children there. And so I'm thinking, is transportation going to be part of that funding bill as well?
The funding in the Senate would go directly to 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which is federal funding, and they could use it for transportation. I would say, the federal funding is absolutely essential, and we need more of it, but we also need help at the state and local level, and we should all be, right now this is an emergency, and every day that we're losing out is essential. So every resource we have should be going towards that. So absolutely. But also, I've seen places where you have businesses where they have vans and buses that they're not using right now that they've donated to some of these learning centers and hubs. So, it's an all hands on deck situation.
And where can our listeners go to find out more information, not only about the programming that may be available, they can get ideas about, but also how they can put some pressure on their local representatives to help to support some of these bills?
Go to afterschoolalliance.org. Please sign up for our newsletters. Please speak out about the need because, your listeners can help us make a real difference.
Yeah, one thing I would add also on the Afterschool Alliance website is a grant program that New York Life worked with the Afterschool Alliance called Aim High. The grant program will open up next week on the 15th, and it allows for local after-school organizations to apply for funding to expand their programs. And the grants range from 1-year capacity building grants to 2-year $100,000 grants aimed at that expansion. So hopefully there are some folks listening that might know of some good quality after-school programs on Long Island that can apply for that award.
Is there any other resources or things available on the afterschoolaLliance.org website that families should be aware of, that they can to give them some ideas on what they can do at home to help support their children after school?
So at the Afterschool Alliance website, afterschoolalliance.org, we have all sorts of examples of COVID resources, everything from how you might be able to get low-cost or free internet to curriculum that you can use at home. So I encourage, parents and after-school educators to go to our site and use everything that is available to you.
So let me ask you this, and would like each of you to answer this individually. If you had to leave our audience with one final thought about the importance of after-school programs, what would that thought be?
For me, I think, even in sort of normal times, after-school programs and summer programs really fill the gap for a lot of students where maybe they were a bit behind academically or needed some more social emotional support. And now that we're hopefully looking toward a post-pandemic era where we know that students across the country are going to be behind and are going to need additional supports, I think the after-school and summer program space is even more important. So while it's always, provided help with everything from supporting academics to struggling, families and children, I think the importance of these programs is just going to be amplified given all of the struggles that our children have had to face over the last year, really. So, my takeaway is that we need more support. We need more parents to speak out about needing support. And these programs are going to have a really great role to play in helping get our children back on track.
So I'm going to echo everything that Heather said and say that, one thing this pandemic has taught us is that kids are learning all the time. In a normal time, 80% of their hours are outside school. Now it might be 100% of their hours outside school. And we have the ability to come out of this stronger with a learning ecosystem and to really recognize the value that all of these educators play to supplement what's going on in the classroom, and that I truly hope that we can take the best practices out of COVID and the best practices from our field to help our kids, where they need to catch up to get ahead and to rethink, how we do learning and build back better.
We'd like to thank our guests, Jodi Grant, Executive Director of the Afterschool Alliance, and Heather Nesle, President of the New York Life Foundation, for coming by and sitting in our class today.
Thank you.
My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and once again, thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nesle Community College, 90.3 WHPC.